Did you know that for every single second of World War II, a German Enigma machine could generate more unique scrambling combinations than there are atoms in the observable universe? My name is Jack, and this is my audiobook narrative about the cracking of the Enigma code. This is not a story about a single genius standing in front of a chalkboard. It is a story about industrial scale mathematics, the terror of the North Atlantic, and the fragile human errors that brought down an invincible machine. By the time this audio ends, you will understand exactly how a team of chess players, mathematicians, and crossword fanatics dismantled the nervous system of the Third Reich, not through magic, but through the brute force of logic and the blood of convoys. October 29th, 1942, 10:48 p.m., the North Atlantic. The ocean is not black. It is a shifting, violent gray, illuminated only by the burning oil of the tanker Bomba. The water temperature is 42 degrees Fahrenheit. A human body lasts 15 minutes here before the muscles lock and the heart stops. On the bridge of U-559, Captain Lieutenant Hans Heitmann lowers his binoculars. He is the hunter. His submarine is a sleek iron predator designed for one purpose: tonnage, the destruction of Allied shipping. Heitmann orders a crash dive. He has been spotted by a British destroyer, the HMS Petard. This is the Enigma. The operator receives a signal from dozens of miles away. A command from the commander of submarines, Karl Dönitz. The operator types a letter. P. The machine clacks. A lamp glows. M. He types another. R. The lamp glows. A. To anyone listening on the open airwaves, the message is gibberish. It is a stream of nonsense letters with no pattern, no repetition, and no structure. It is noise. But to Heitmann, it is a coordinate, a vector for attack, a lifeline. The destroyer above drops another pattern of depth charges. The shockwave cracks the pressure hull of U-559. Water sprays in at high velocity, cutting like a knife. The lights die. The submarine is doomed. But the operator's first instinct is not to save himself. It is to save the machine. He grabs the codebooks, printed in water-soluble red ink. He reaches for the Enigma to smash the delicate internal wiring. This is the reality of the war. It is not fought just with torpedoes and shells. It is fought with information. And for the first 2 years of the conflict, the Allies are fighting blind. They are bleeding to death in the Atlantic because they cannot read the mind of the enemy. They're up against a device that creates a wall of mathematical noise so dense that it seems impenetrable. The number you need to remember is 158,962, 55217, 826, 360,000, 159 quintillion. That is the number of possible settings for the standard 3 rotor Enigma machine. If you had 100,000 operators, each testing one setting every second, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would take twice the age of the universe to check every possibility. And the Germans changed the settings every night at midnight. This is the scale of the problem. It was not a puzzle. It was a statistical fortress. And inside that fortress, the German military moved armies, coordinated air raids, and guided Wolfpacks of submarines to the throats of Allied convoys. To understand how this fortress was breached, we have to zoom out. We have to look at the map of Europe, not as a collection of borders, but as a grid of communication lines. By 1939, radio had changed warfare. In the First World War, generals relied on telephone lines and runners. If you cut the wire, the command stopped. If the runner was shot, the message died. But radio is omnidirectional. It travels at the speed of light. It allows a commander in Berlin to speak to a tank division in Poland or a submarine in the mid-Atlantic instantly. But radio has a fatal flaw. Everyone can hear it. If you broadcast the location of a convoy, the enemy hears it too. If you order retreat, the enemy knows you are weak. So you must encrypt. You must scramble the signal so that only the intended recipient can understand it. Encryption is as old as writing itself. Caesar used it. The Spartans used it. But in the age of machines, the old methods were too slow. You cannot have a general sitting with a code book and a pencil while tanks are rolling at 30 miles per hour. You need a machine that works as fast as you can type. Enter Arthur Scherbius. In 1918, just as the First World War was ending, this German engineer patented a cipher machine. He called it Enigma, the Greek word for riddle. He didn't build it for war. He built it for banks and businesses to protect their trade secrets. It was a commercial failure. It was too expensive, too clunky. But the German military saw something the bankers didn't. They saw the future of secure command and control. By 1926, the German Navy had adopted it. By 1928, the Army followed. Let's look at the machine itself. It is deceptively simple. It sits in a wooden box about the size of a heavy suitcase. When you open the lid, you see three main components. First, the keyboard, standard German quartz layout. Second, the lamp board. Above the keyboard, 26 small round windows, each labeled with a letter. When you press a key, a bulb lights up under one of these windows. Third, the rotor unit. At the top of the machine, 3 slots hold 3 distinct wheels or rotors. Each rotor has 26 contacts on one side and 26 on the other, wired internally in a jumbled mess. Here's what happens when you press the letter A. An electrical current leaves the battery. It flows through the plug board on the front of the machine. This is the first line of defense. The plug board allows the operator to swap pairs of letters with cables, like an old telephone switchboard. If A is plugged to J, the signal becomes J before it even enters the machine. The current then travels up into the first rotor. The internal wiring scrambles it. J might become X. It exits the first rotor and enters the second. X becomes T. It enters the third. T becomes K. Then it hits the reflector. This is the genius of the Enigma. The reflector is a fixed unit at the end of the rotor stack. It takes the signal and bounces it back through the rotors in reverse order, taking a different electrical path each time. The signal travels back through rotor 3, rotor 2, rotor 1, back through the plug board, and finally lights up a lamp. You press A. The lamp W lights up. But here's the trick. Every time you press a key, the rightmost rotor advances 1 step, like the odometer on a car. This changes the internal wiring path for the very next letter. If you press A again, the signal takes a completely different route. This time the lamp P might light up. Press A again. R lights up. This is a polyalphabetic substitution cipher. The cipher alphabet changes with every single keystroke. Even if you typed A, the machine would output 5 different letters, perhaps BGDTR. To decode the message, you need another Enigma machine, and you need it set up exactly the same way, the same rotors in the same order, the same starting position, the same plug board connections. If your machine is set up identically, when you type the cipher text BGDTR, the reflector bounces the signal back along the reciprocal path, and the lamps light up. Ah! It works because of the reciprocity. The machine is symmetrical. If A is encrypted to W, then W is decrypted to A, provided the settings are the same. The security of the system relies entirely on the settings. These are the keys of the day. Every morning, a German radio operator would consult a top-secret sheet of paper printed in red ink. It told him which 3 rotors to pick from a set of 5. It told him the order to place them in the machine. It told him the ring setting, the internal offset of the wiring. It told him the plug board connections, which letters to swap with cables. And it told him the ground setting, the starting position of the rotors for the day. Without that sheet of paper, an interceptor is looking at 159 quintillion possibilities. For the French and British intelligence services in the 1930s, the Enigma was a black hole. They intercepted the signals. They heard the Morse code chirping through the ether, but they couldn't read a word. They gave up. They concluded that the machine was unbreakable, but one nation could not afford to give up: Poland. Sandwiched between a hostile Germany and a hostile Soviet Union, Poland lived in a state of existential paranoia. They knew that if war came, they would be the first to fall. They needed to know what the Germans were planning. In 1932, the Polish Cipher Bureau did something revolutionary. Traditionally, codebreakers were linguists. They were people who studied sentence structure and letter frequency. But the head of the Polish Bureau, Major Guido Langer, realized that the Enigma was not a linguistic problem. It was a physics problem. It was a machine. He hired mathematicians from Poznan University, 20-year-old students who knew group theory and permutation cycles. Among them was a quiet, bespectacled young man named Marian Rejewski. Rejewski didn't have a captured Enigma machine. He didn't have the blueprints. He only had the intercepted messages and a deep intuition about permutations. What Rejewski achieved in late 1932 is one of the greatest feats of pure intellectual deduction in history. By analyzing the patterns of the scrambled letters, he reverse engineered the internal wiring of the Enigma rotors. He reconstructed the machine mathematically without ever seeing the inside of one. He found a flaw in the German procedure. To ensure the message was received correctly, German operators would encrypt the message key, the specific 3-letter starting position for that specific message, twice. So if the operator chose QBQE, he would type QUE. The Enigma would encrypt this into 6 letters. Rejewski noticed that the first and fourth letters corresponded to the same input letter. The second and fifth were the same input. The third and sixth were the same. This was a crack in the armor. It was a tiny sliver of a pattern in the wall of noise. Using this pattern, Rejewski built a machine of his own. He called it the Bomba. The Bomba was a loud, clattering device that chained 6 copycat Enigma machines together. It was designed to cycle through the rotor settings automatically, looking for that specific double key pattern. It worked. For nearly 7 years, while the rest of the world slept, the Poles were reading German high command messages. They knew about the rearmament. They knew about the troop movements. They watched the German war machine grow from a skeleton into a monster. But the monster was learning. In late 1938, the Germans added 2 new rotors to the set, increasing the possible combinations tenfold. They increased the number of plugboard cables. The complexity skyrocketed. The Polish resources were overwhelmed. They simply didn't have the money or the industrial capacity to build enough bombas to keep up with the new permutations. The lights were going out in Europe. The invasion was imminent. July 25th, 1939. 5 weeks before the invasion of Poland, a secret meeting takes place in the Pirie Forest, south of Warsaw. The Polish codebreakers summon their British and French counterparts. The British arrive expecting little. They think the Poles are behind. They think the Enigma is still unbreakable. In a small, smoke-filled room, Rejewski and his team reveal their secret. They show the stunned British and French officers the reconstructed Enigma. They show them the Bomba. They show them the piles of decrypted messages. They hand over everything: the blueprints, the mathematical methodology, the replicas of the machine. The British cryptographer Dilwyn Knox was reportedly speechless. The French were stunned. The Poles gave them the keys to the kingdom just days before their own country was swallowed by the dark. This act of generosity changed the course of history. Without the Polish head start, the British would have started from zero in 1939. They would have been years behind. And in the war of tonnage, years meant millions of tons of shipping and hundreds of thousands of lives. September 1st, 1939. Germany invades Poland. The Second World War begins. The Polish codebreakers flee across the border to Romania, then to France. But the baton has been passed. The center of gravity shifts to a Victorian estate 50 miles northwest of London, Bletchley Park. If you visited Bletchley Park in early 1940, you would not see a high-tech military base. You would see a sprawling, ugly mansion surrounded by hastily erected wooden huts. It looked like a holiday camp that had run out of money. But inside those huts, the British government was assembling the strangest army in military history. They recruited through crossword competitions in the Daily Telegraph. They hired chess champions. They hired Egyptologists, papyrologists, and experts in medieval German poetry. They hired anyone who had a brain capable of lateral thinking and pattern recognition. They were known as the Golf, Cheese, and Chess Society by the locals. But they were officially the Government Code and Cipher School. At the center of this eclectic group was a man who fit no mold. Alan Turing, 27 years old, disheveled, socially awkward. He wore his trousers held up by a tie. He chained his tea mug to the radiator so no one would steal it. He had a laugh that was described as a crow's caw. But inside his head was a concept that would define the 20th century. Turing didn't just see the Enigma as a math problem. He saw it as a logic state problem. He understood that to beat a machine, you could not use human intuition. Alone, you needed a better machine. The Polish Bomba had relied on the double key procedure, the repetition of the message start letters, but Turing knew the Germans would eventually stop doing that. He needed a method that was robust, a method that didn't rely on a specific procedural error, but on the inherent logic of the machine itself. He began to design the British bomb. Note the spelling, B-O-M-B-E. A tribute to the Polish Bomba, but a completely different beast. While Turing worked in the freezing, drafty Hut 8, the war outside was becoming catastrophic. Spring 1940. The phony war ends. The German blitzkrieg rolls across Western Europe. Denmark falls in 6 hours. Norway falls. The Low Countries are crushed. France, with the largest army in Europe, collapses in 6 weeks. The British army is evacuated from Dunkirk, leaving all their heavy equipment behind. Britain stands alone. The only thing keeping the island nation alive is the sea. Britain imports 70 of its food and nearly all of its oil. Every gallon of aviation fuel for the Spitfires, every loaf of bread, every bullet has to cross the North Atlantic in the hold of a merchant ship. And out there, in the black pit of the mid-Atlantic where air cover cannot reach, the U-boats are waiting. The German U-boat arm, the U-Bootwaffe, is commanded by Admiral Karl Dönitz. He is a tactician of genius. He discards the old rules of submarine warfare. No more lone hunters waiting for a target. He invents the brutal tactic, the Wolfpack. He coordinates his submarines by radio. They form a patrol line across the convoy routes. When one U-boat spots a convoy, it does not attack. It dives and shadows. It sends a sighting report back to headquarters in France using the Enigma. Dönitz receives the signal. He decrypts it. Then he broadcasts a homing signal to every U-boat in the vicinity. They swarm towards the convoy. They wait for nightfall. Then they attack on the surface inside the convoy columns, ripping the merchant ships apart at point-blank range. The British Navy is helpless. They can see the ships exploding. They can hear the frantic distress calls. But they don't know where the submarines are coming from. They don't know how many there are, because they cannot read the Enigma. The traffic analysis gives them clues. They can tell that a submarine is transmitting, but they don't know what it is saying. The direction-finding stations can pinpoint the rough location of a radio blast, but the ocean is too big. In Hut 8 at Bletchley Park, the pressure is physical. It is a weight in the chest. Every day, the codebreakers fail to find the daily key. Ships sink. Men drown and freeze in oil. Turing is working on a new idea, a crib. A crib is a guess. It is a snippet of plain text that you suspect is in the encrypted message. The Germans were disciplined, but they were humans, and humans are creatures of habit. Every morning at 6 a.m., a weather ship in the harbor might send a report. It almost always contains the German word for weather, wetter. If you know that the encrypted string XJetLOS probably means wetter, you have a way in. You can work backward. You can ask, what settings of the Enigma machine would transform wetter into XJetLOS? This is a massive logic puzzle. Because of the plug board, there are billions of ways this transformation could happen. But Turing realizes something crucial. The Enigma has a rule, a design feature that is also a fatal weakness. A letter can never be encrypted as itself. It can never be A. B can never be B. This seems like a good security feature. It ensures everything is scrambled. But to a logician like Turing, it is a constraint. It eliminates possibilities. If you have a piece of ciphertext and you place the word wetter underneath it, and at any point the letter W lines up with W or E with E, then you know that position is impossible. The crib is in the wrong place. This allowed the codebreakers to align the cribs correctly. Once you have the crib aligned, you have a menu, a logical loop. W connects to X, E connects to J. You can draw a diagram of these connections. Turing designs the bomb to search for these loops. The machine is essentially 36 Enigma machines wired together, simulating the turning of the rotors. It doesn't check every setting. It uses electricity to disprove the impossible settings. It runs through the permutations. Click, click, click. If a circuit is completed, if a contradiction is found, the machine keeps moving. But if the machine stops, it means it has found a setting that could be true. A setting where the logical loop holds together without contradiction. It was a machine designed to find a needle in a haystack by burning down the haystack and leaving the needle behind. But in 1940, the bombs were not ready. They were still prototypes. The designs were with the engineers at the British Tabulating Machine Company. The Codebreakers were doing it by hand. They were using rotting paper sheets with holes punched in them, sliding them over each other on light boxes to find the patterns. It was slow, it was agonizing. And then the Germans changed the rules again, May 1st, 1940. The German army changes its key distribution system. The patterns the Poles had used vanish completely. The double key is abandoned. The lights go out at Bletchley Park. For weeks, they read nothing. The German invasion of France is happening in real time, and the British intelligence is deaf. The panzers are cutting through the Ardennes. The Luftwaffe is pounding the retreating columns. And the Enigma traffic is a wall of silence. This is the nadir, the lowest point. The Codebreakers are exhausted. Their eyes are red from staring at letter strings for 18 hours a day. The air in the huts is stale with tobacco smoke and fear. They know that if they don't break back in, the war might be lost before it really begins. But in the chaos of the evacuation from Dunkirk, a mistake happens. Not a mathematical mistake, a human one. Discipline. The Enigma is only as strong as the man operating it. The rules say, choose 3 random letters for your message start. Random. Q, L, M, X, P, O. But under the stress of bombardment, facing the terror of combat, a German operator gets lazy. He looks at the keyboard. He hits 3 keys that are close together, Q, W, E. Or he hits the initials of his girlfriend. Or he hits the same 3 keys he used yesterday. These are called sillies by the Bletchley staff, named after a specific operator who famously used the initials of his girlfriend, Silly. These tiny human failures are the cracks in the dam. A single careless operator can compromise the daily key for the entire network. If you can break his message, you have the settings. If you have the settings, you can read every other message sent on that network that day. Heroism, a young mathematician at Bletchley, has a hunch. He imagines the German operator. He imagines the machine in its box. When you close the lid, the rotors are usually set to display a specific setting so the lid fits. Maybe the operator in a hurry doesn't spin the wheels far enough when he starts his shift. Maybe the random start position is actually just a few clicks away from the lid closed position. It's called the Heroism tip. It's a psychological guess, not a mathematical one. They try it. They check the settings close to the standard ring positions. It works. They break into the Luftwaffe red key. The flow of information resumes. They can see the orders for the bombing raids on London. They can see the organization of the airfields. But the naval Enigma, the code used by the U-boats, remains dark. The Navy is more disciplined. Their machines are more complex. They have distinct procedures. And out in the Atlantic, the tonnage war is reaching a crescendo. The U-boats are sinking 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 tons of shipping a month. Churchill later wrote that the only thing that really frightened him during the war was the U-boat peril. If the supply line snaps, Britain starves. This sets the stage for the true battle of Bletchley Park. It is not just about reading messages, it is about speed. A decrypt that arrives 3 days late is a history lesson. It is useless. A decrypt that arrives in 2 hours is a weapon. It allows you to reroute a convoy. It allows you to send a destroyer to a specific coordinate to drop depth charges on a waiting submarine. The goal is not just to crack the code, it is to crack it fast, to reduce the time from interception to decryption from days to hours. This requires an industrial revolution in intelligence. It requires the transformation of Bletchley Park from a collection of eccentrics in a cottage into a factory of information processing. And it requires the capture of physical evidence. They need a pinch. They need to steal the secrets from the enemy's hands. March 18th, 1941. The first production bomb arrives at Bletchley Park. They name it Victory. It does not look like victory. It looks like a heavy, awkward cabinet, 7 feet tall and 6 feet wide, painted in a dull military bronze. It smells of ozone and machine oil. Inside, it is a tangled gut of 12 miles of wire and 97,000 soldered connections. On the front, 108 drums, replicating the Enigma rotors, spin in synchronized chaos. When they turn it on, the sound is deafening, a rhythmic mechanical clutter. Tick, 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 like 1,000 knitting needles clicking at once. To the cryptanalysts of HUD 8, it is the sweetest sound on Earth. This machine is the physical manifestation of Alan Turing's logic. It is the industrialization of thought. While a human mathematician might test one hypothesis every minute, the Bomba tests 17,576 possible settings in 20 minutes. It is a brute force engine, but it is starving. The bomb is useless without a menu. It needs a crib. It needs a suspected piece of plain text to crunch against the cipher text. And in the spring of 1941, the Atlantic is dark. The German Navy introduces new procedures. They stop using the weather reports in the predictable format. The cribs dry up. The Victory machine sits idle. Meanwhile, the North Atlantic is a slaughterhouse. April 1941. The losses are catastrophic. The British lose 687,000 tons of merchant shipping in a single month. That is nearly 200 ships, 200 crews. The food reserves in Britain dip to critical levels. The fuel for the RAF is running low. Churchill paces the cabinet room. He knows the statistics. Britain cannot survive another 6 months of this. The timeline of the war has compressed. It is no longer a question of winning. It is a question of eating. The Codebreakers cannot solve this with math alone. You cannot deduce a random variable if you have 0 entry points. They need a physical breach. They need a pinch. May 9, 1941. South of Iceland. Convoy OB-318 is limping west. 38 merchant ships escorted by a handful of destroyers. The sea is rough. The visibility is poor. Stalking them is U-110. The commander of U-110 is Fritz Julius Lemp. He's a celebrity in Germany. He is the man who sank the liner Athenia on the very first day of the war. He is aggressive, he is arrogant, and he is about to make a mistake that will cost Germany the war. Lemp sees the convoy. He attacks on the surface. His torpedoes strike 2 ships. The explosions light up the horizon, but he lingers too long. The escort destroyers, HMS Bulldog and HMS Broadway, spot his periscope. They turn. They accelerate. Depth charges rain down. The explosions are precise. U-110 is hammered. The hydroplanes jam. The electric motors fail. The rudder locks. The submarine drops like a stone. Then Lemp panics. He blows the ballast tanks. U-110 rockets to the surface, breaking the water right in front of the British destroyers. What happens next is a chaotic sequence of seconds that outweighs years of diplomacy. Lemp orders abandon ship. The crew pours out of the hatches, hands raised, jumping into the freezing swell. Lemp expects the submarine to sink. He has ordered the vents to be opened. He assumes the explosive scuttling charges are set. But the U-boat does not sink. It wallows in the waves, listing but buoyant. On the bridge of the HMS Bulldog, Captain Joe Baker Cresswell sees the U-boat sitting there. He makes a split-second decision. He does not ram it. He does not sink it. He yells, "Boarding party away!" A whaler boat drops into the water. In it is Sub-Lieutenant David Baum, a 20-year-old officer with a pistol and a flashlight. He rows toward the Nazi war machine. Imagine the scene. The German crew is in the water, screaming. The U-boat is eerily silent, rolling in the Atlantic swell. Baum climbs up the rusted ladder of the conning tower. He expects a trap. He expects a German officer with a machine gun. He finds nothing. The bridge is empty. He drops down the hatch into the control room. The lights are still on. There's a hissing sound of leaking air. The air is thick with chlorine gas from the damaged batteries. It is a tomb in waiting. Baum moves forward. He finds the radio room, and there it is, bolted to the desk. The Enigma machine. It looks like a typewriter. It is plugged in. The lamps are still warm. But Baum, despite not being a cryptographer, knows that the machine is just hardware. The hardware is useless without the software. He looks around. On the desk and on the shelves are books. Code books, signal manuals. The Kurds signal heft, the short signal book used for sighting reports. The Wetterfunkspruch, the weather code book. And most importantly, the officer's log with the daily settings for the months of April and June. Baum and his men form a human chain. They pass the books up the ladder. They pass the Enigma machine up, wrapping it in a coat to protect it from the salt spray. They work fast. The U-boat is settling lower in the water. At any moment, it could plunge to the bottom, taking the secrets and the men with it. They strip the room. They take the charts. They take the seemingly insignificant papers from the waste bin. 6 hours later, U-110 sinks. Fritz Julius Lemp dies in the water, realizing too late that his ship has not gone down. The British keep the capture a total secret. They treat the German survivors with extreme isolation. They tell the world that U-110 was sunk with all hands. To Berlin, U-110 has simply vanished, a casualty of the sea. They do not change the codes. They do not change the books. The crates from U-110 arrive at Bletchley Park 3 days later. The atmosphere in Hut 8 transforms instantly. It is no longer a room of frustration. It is a room of frantic, focused surgery. They have the keys. They have the daily settings for the entire month of June. They don't need the bombs to find the settings. They just look them up in the captured book. Suddenly, the lights turn on. For the first time in the war, the British Admiralty can read the German naval mind in real time. They know where the Wolfpacks are. They know the rendezvous points for the supply tankers. The effect is immediate and devastating. In June 1941, the British reroute the convoys. They steer the merchant ships through the empty gaps in the U-boat lines. The U-boats sit waiting for prey that never comes. They report back to Dönitz. No contacts. Ocean empty. Dönitz is baffled. He assumes it is bad luck. He assumes British radar has improved. He never suspects that the enemy is reading his mail. But the true value of the U-110 pinch was not just the settings for June. It was the short signal book. German U-boats used a shorthand system to reduce the time they spent transmitting on the surface. Instead of typing enemy convoy sighted at grid AL34, they would type a 4-letter code. This code was then encrypted. Before U-110, Bletchley didn't know what these codes meant. Now they had the dictionary. This allowed Turing to develop a new technique, Bomberismus. This is where the story shifts from high seas adventure back to the quiet, dusty intensity of the huts. Bomberismus was a statistical process. It used the fact that the English language and the German language is not random. Certain letters appear more often than others. Certain correlations exist between the plaintext and the ciphertext if the settings are close. Turing realized that he could use the captured Bigram tables from U-110 to measure the probability of rotor correlations. They used long sheets of paper printed in Banbury, Oxfordshire, hence the name. They punched holes in the sheets representing the encrypted message. They slid the sheets over each other. When the holes aligned, light shone through. It was low-tech. It was tedious. But it was brilliant. Bomberismus allowed the codebreakers to determine which rotors were being used that day before they even turned on the bombs. Remember the math. 60 possible rotor orders. Bomberismus could eliminate 50 of them in an hour of paper sliding. This meant the bombs only had to check 10 rotor orders. It cut the processing time by 80%. It turned a 20-hour job into a 4-hour job. By late 1941, Bletchley Park is no longer a cottage industry. It is a factory. The Victory Bomb is joined by others. Agnes, Spider, Dragon. They are housed in new brick buildings. The floors are concrete. The noise is a constant grinding roar. And who is running these machines? Not professors, not mathematicians. Wrens, the Women's Royal Naval Service. Thousands of young women, 18, 19, 20 years old. They are bussed in from the surrounding countryside. They are sworn to total secrecy. They are told that if they speak a word of what they do, they are committing treason. They don't know what the machines do. They are not told. Their job is physical and mental endurance. Stand in front of the bomb. Receive a menu from the cryptanalysts in Hut 8. Plug the cables into the back of the machine according to the diagram. Red wire to socket J. Blue wire to socket P. Set the drums to the start position. Switch it on. Wait for the stop. When the machine stops, it means a possible solution has been found. The Wren writes it down. She calls the supervisor. Then she restarts the machine. They work in 8-hour shifts. The rooms are hot. The machines generate massive amounts of heat. The air is filled with the smell of warm bakelite and oil. The noise is so loud, they have to shout to be heard. These women are the pistons in the engine of intelligence. Without them, Turing's genius is just theory. With them, it is a weapon. By August 1941, the system is humming. The time from interception to decryption drops. 48 hours, 24 hours, 12 hours, then 6 hours. Imagine the loop. U-boat surfaces at 2 hours p.m. It transmits a weather report. A listening station in Scotland intercepts the Morse code. It is teletyped to Bletchley Park. A Wren in Hut 10 types the ciphertext onto a perforated strip. The cryptanalysts in Hut 8 use Bomberismus to guess the rotor order. A menu is run to the bomb room. A Wren plugs up the machine. The drums spin. 3:30 p.m. The machine stops. The setting is found. The setting is verified. The German naval key for the day is broken. All intercepted messages for that day are now readable. 4:15 p.m. The Admiralty receives the location of every U-boat in the North Atlantic. 4:30 p.m. Orders go out to the convoys. Alter course to 270 degrees. Submarine pack ahead. The convoy turns. The U-boats are left staring at an empty ocean. It is a miracle of logistics. It is the first time in history that information is being processed on an industrial scale to affect the outcome of a battle in real time. But war is a pendulum. Just as one side gains an advantage, the other adapts. The Germans are not stupid. They see their kill rates dropping. They see the convoys dodging their traps. Donut suspects security leaks. He investigates spies. He investigates treason. He never suspects the machine. He trusts the math. He believes the Enigma is unbreakable. But he decides to add a layer of security anyway, just to be safe. February 1st, 1942. The Wrens in the bomb room arrive for their shift. They plug in the menus. They switch on the machines. The machines spin and spin and spin. They do not stop. The cryptanalysts in Hut 8 stare at the traffic. It looks different. The headers are wrong. The patterns are gone. Panic sets in. The German Navy has introduced a new machine for the U-boats, the M4. The standard Enigma has 3 rotors. The M4 has 4. The math changes instantly. With 3 rotors, you have 17,576 starting positions. With 4 rotors, you have 456,976. The complexity does not just double, it explodes. The number of permutations creates a wall so high that the bombs cannot scale it. The Bambarismus techniques stop working. The cribs don't fit. The Atlantic goes dark again. This is the shark blackout. And it happens at the worst possible moment. The United States has just entered the war. American merchant ships are flooding into the Atlantic. But the U.S. Navy is inexperienced. They don't know the Wolfpack tactics. They refuse to use convoys initially. They sail with their lights on. And now Bletchley cannot warn them. The U-boats move to the American coast. It is called the Second Happy Time. It is a turkey shoot. Tankers are torpedoed within sight of the boardwalks of New Jersey. Tourists on the beach watch ships burn. In the first 6 months of 1942, the Allies lose 3 million tons of shipping. The mood at Bletchley is funereal. Turing and his team are defeated. They look at the 4-rotor problem, and they see a cliff face. To break the 4-rotor Enigma with the current technology would take bombs that are 50 times faster or 50 times more numerous. They have neither. They need help. They need resources that a bankrupt Britain cannot provide. And they need another pinch. But you cannot capture a U-boat twice. The Germans are wary now. They've added new self-destruct charges. They have ordered operators to shoot the machine if they are boarded. The codebreakers are stuck. They are watching the tonnage graphs climb vertically. Every line on the graph represents a ship. Every ship represents a crew. Then a stroke of luck. Or perhaps a stroke of inevitable probability in a system this large. The Germans make a mistake in the transition. They have to communicate with the older U-boats that still have the 3-rotor machines. So, for a brief window, they send messages in both the 3-rotor code and the 4-rotor code. It is a Rosetta Stone, but it is fleeting. The window is closing. This sets the stage for the climax of the intelligence war. The race to build the high-speed bomb. The race is to bring the Americans into the secret. And the desperate, bloody struggle to capture the inner workings of the 4-rotor beast before the supply lines to Britain are cut forever. The solution will not come from a single hero. It will come from a collaboration across the ocean. It will involve the U.S. Navy, the British commandos, and a deeper dive into the physics of the machine than anyone thought possible. But before the machines can save them, the humans have to bleed. October 30th, 1942. The Mediterranean. A British destroyer, HMS Petard, is hunting a U-boat. This is not a planned raid. It is a violent, chaotic encounter. The U-boat is U-509. The captain of the Petard, Mark Thornton, is a man who does not believe in taking prisoners. He believes in killing submarines. He hammers U-559 with depth charges for hours. The submarine cracks. It is forced to the surface. This brings us back to the opening image, the dark water, the dying submarine. But this time, the stakes are different. U-559 is carrying the M4 Enigma, the four-rotor nightmare. And more importantly, it is carrying the weather-short signal key for the four-rotor system. If the British can get that book, they can break Shark. If they fail, the Atlantic remains a graveyard. 3 men from the Petard jump into the water. Lieutenant Tony Fasten, able seaman Colin Grazier, and a young canteen assistant, Tommy Brown, who is only 16 years old. They swim to the sinking iron coffin. They climb inside. The water is rising fast inside the U-boat. The lights are out. It is pitch black, filled with the screaming of strained metal. Fasten and Grazier find the captain's cabin. They smash open the locker. They find the code books. They don't look for the machine. It's too heavy, bolted down. They grab the books. They pass them up the hatch to Tommy Brown, who is standing on the conning tower. Brown yells down, "She's going! Get out!" The water is at their waists, then their chests. They hand up another bundle. The U-boat lurches. The bow drops. The sea pours in through the open hatch. Tommy Brown is thrown clear. He clutches the documents to his chest, treading water in the oil-slicked sea. But Fasten and Grazier do not come out. They go down with U-559. They are dragged down hundreds of fathoms into the dark. They died not firing a gun, but passing wet books up a ladder. Their sacrifice breaks the blackout. When those waterlogged books dry out in Bletchley Park, the cryptanalysts insert the data into the struggle against the four-rotor machine. The weather-short signal key allows them to strip away the fourth rotor's variable. It reduces the problem back down to 3 rotors. It makes the math manageable again. The lights flicker back on. But the war is shifting. It is no longer just about defense. It is about offense. The Allies are preparing for D-Day. They are preparing to invade Europe. And to do that, they need to know not just where the U-boats are, but what the entire German army is thinking. This requires a new level of decryption. It requires the cracking of the fish codes, the teleprinter ciphers used by Hitler himself, and it requires the Americans. November 1942. The books from U-559 arrive at Bletchley Park. The Shark blackout ends. The Atlantic becomes transparent again. But solving the riddle is no longer enough. The scale of the war has expanded beyond the capacity of a British country estate. The United States is now fully mobilized. The arsenal of democracy is churning out Liberty ships, Sherman tanks, and B-17 bombers. But they are also building a different kind of weapon. In Dayton, Ohio, inside Building 26 of the National Cash Register Company, NCR, a secret project is underway. It is led by Joseph Desch, a brilliant engineer who works under the pressure of the U.S. Navy. The British send the designs of the bomb across the Atlantic. They admit they cannot build them fast enough. They hand the baton to the Americans. Desch looks at the British design. It is clever, but it is slow. It relies on mechanical commutators, spinning metal brushes. It is prone to arcing. The Americans do what Americans do best in the 20th century. They industrialize it. They make it bigger, faster, and more reliable. The U.S. Navy bombs are monsters. They are 7 feet tall, 10 feet long, and weigh 2.5 tons. But they're fast. While a British bomb ticks like a clock, the American Bomba hums like a dynamo. It cycles through the permutations at a speed that tears the paper menus if they are not careful. By the summer of 1943, there are 120 of these machines running in Dayton and Washington, D.C. They're crunching the Enigma settings 24 hours a day. The relationship between Bletchley and Washington is tense. It is a marriage of necessity. The British have the genius. The Americans have the horsepower. They divide the world. The British handle the Luftwaffe and the Army Enigma. The Americans take the U-boat Enigma. The result is total information dominance. By mid-1943, the U-boat war is effectively over. Admiral Dönitz sends his Wolfpacks out, and they are slaughtered. They are bombed by aircraft that know exactly where they are. They are hunted by destroyer support groups that wait for them at their refueling points. In May 1943 alone, 41 U-boats are sunk. Dönitz withdraws his fleet from the North Atlantic. He writes in his diary, "We have lost the Battle of the Atlantic." He blames radar. He blames treason. He never blames the math. But while the Enigma is being crushed by industrial brute force, a new, darker shadow appears over the ether. The Enigma was a tactical machine. It was used by divisions, ships, and airfields. It carried orders like attack convoy at dawn or need fuel supplies. But there was another level of communication, the strategic level, the conversations between Hitler and his field marshals, the orders that moved entire army groups, the discussions about the Holocaust, the V-weapon programs, and the defense of the Atlantic Wall. These messages were not sent by Enigma. The Germans believed Enigma was secure, but they knew it was slow. For the highest level of command, they needed a teleprinter, a machine that could send hundreds of characters a minute. They built the Lorenz SZ-40. The British codebreakers called it Tunny. The traffic was called fish. If the Enigma was a padlock, the Lorenz was a bank vault. The Enigma has 3 or 4 rotors. The Lorenz has 12. The Enigma scrambles letters. The Lorenz scrambles the electronic impulses of the teleprinter code itself, the Bodo code. The complexity is astronomical. The number of possible settings for a Lorenz machine is not in the quintillions. It is a number so large, it has no name in common language. And unlike Enigma, the British never captured a Lorenz machine. They never saw one. They didn't have a manual. They didn't have a wiring diagram. They had to break it with pure thought. August 30th, 1941. A German operator in Athens has a long message to send to Vienna. It is nearly 4,000 characters long. He sets up his Lorenz machine. He chooses the wheel settings. He begins to type. At the receiving end in Vienna, the message comes through garbled. The receiver types back. Didn't get it. Send it again. The operator in Athens is annoyed. It is late. He resets the machine. But, and this is the moment that turns the war, he does not change the wheel settings. He uses the exact same start position. This is the cardinal sin of cryptography. A depth. 2 messages encrypted with the same key. If he had typed the message exactly the same way again, the ciphertext would have been identical. No harm done, but he is lazy. He abbreviates. In the first message, he typed the German word Spruchnummer, message number. In the second message, he types Spruchnar, message number. He saves a few keystrokes. He loses the Third Reich. Because the texts are slightly different, the encryption shifts. The two ciphertext streams, when compared, are not identical. They slide against each other. The interceptors at Knockholt in Kent catch both messages. They send them to Bletchley Park. Enter John Tiltman, a tall, fierce brigadier who was one of Bletchley's best codebreakers. He realizes he has a depth. He places the two messages side by side. By guessing the plain text differences, he is able to strip away the encryption layer and reveal the key stream, the pure pattern of the machine's wheels. He has a string of 4,000 numbers. This is the heartbeat of the Lorenz machine, but he still doesn't know how the machine works. He doesn't know how the wheels are wired or how they interact. He hands the data to a young chemistry student named Bill Tutte. Bill Tutte is 24. He is quiet. He's not a flashy genius like Turing. He is a plodder, a man who stares at a problem until it dissolves. He takes the data to his room. He writes out the sequences in rows of different lengths. He is looking for a period, a repetition. He stares at the dots and crosses for 3 months. The other codebreakers think he is wasting his time. The Lorenz is impossible, they say. Focus on the Enigma. But Tutte finds it. He notices a faint pattern that repeats every 41 characters, then another that repeats every 31. He starts to draw. He deduces that there must be a wheel with 41 teeth and another with 31. He deduces that the wheels interact in a specific cascading logic. Without ever seeing the machine, without ever speaking to a German engineer, Bill Tutte reverse engineers the entire logical architecture of the Lorenz SZ40. When the British finally captured a Lorenz machine in 1945, right at the end of the war, they were shocked. Tutte's diagram of the machine matched the physical reality almost perfectly. It is arguably the greatest intellectual feat of the Second World War. But knowing how the machine works is only half the battle. You still need the settings. The Germans changed the Lorenz settings every day. To break the daily code, the British used a method called Newmanry, led by the mathematician Max Newman. They used statistical analysis to find the start positions of the 12 wheels, but the math was horrifyingly complex. To break one message took weeks of hand calculation. By the time they read a message, the battle was over. The information was historical, not tactical. They needed speed. They needed a machine that could process millions of calculations per second. They needed a computer. Enter Tommy Flowers. Flowers is not a mathematician. He is an engineer. He works for the Post Office Research Station at Dulles Hill. He builds telephone exchanges. He knows about switching. He comes to Bletchley. He looks at the problem. He sees the slow, clicking mechanical machines they are trying to build to solve the Lorenz. He shakes his head. It won't work, he says. It's too slow. The parts will wear out. What do you suggest? They ask. Valves, Flowers says. Vacuum tubes. The Bletchley scientists laugh at him. Vacuum tubes are fragile. They're used in radios. They burn out. If you build a machine with 1,000 tubes, it will be broken half the time. Flowers replies, they only burn out when you turn them on and off. If you leave them on, they will last forever. He proposes a machine with 1,500 valves, a machine with no moving parts in the calculation unit, a machine that uses electrons, not gears. The Bletchley brass refuses to fund him. They think it's a pipe dream. So Tommy Flowers goes back to the post office. He uses his own money. He uses his own team. He builds the machine in secret, working 11-hour days, sleeping on the floor of the workshop. Christmas 1943. The machine is ready. It is trucked to Bletchley Park. It is reassembled in Block F. They call it Colossus. It is a beast. It stands 8 feet high. It glows with the orange light of 1,600 thermionic valves. It generates so much heat that the operators have to work in their undershirts, even in winter. They feed a paper tape into the reader. The tape contains the intercepted German message. The tape spins. It moves at 30 miles per hour, 5,000 characters per second. The tape wheels scream. If the tape snaps, it slashes through the air like a razor blade. The Wrens are warned to stand back or lose a hand. February 5th, 1944. Colossus Mark I attacks its first message. The operators watch the lights flickering on the panel. It is checking the statistical probabilities of the wheel settings. In 10 minutes, it does what would take a human team weeks. It spits out the settings. The cryptanalysts type them into a tunny machine. The German message prints out in plain English. It works. The age of the computer has arrived. Not in a university lab, but in a code-breaking factory, born out of the desperate need to kill Nazis faster. By June 1944, they have built 10 Colossi. The Mark II version is even faster. It has 2,400 valves. It can read 25,000 characters per second equivalent speed by reading parallel channels. The timing is perfect, because the greatest invasion in history is about to launch. Operation Overlord, D-Day. The Allies are massing in southern England. Eisenhower needs to know one thing. Does Hitler know where we are landing? The deception plan, Operation Fortitude, is designed to make the Germans think the invasion is coming at the Pas de Calais, not Normandy. They have built fake tanks, fake planes, fake radio traffic. But is it working? Eisenhower cannot rely on guesses. He needs proof. He gets it from Colossus, because Colossus is reading the messages between Field Marshal Rommel and Berlin. It is reading the messages from Hitler to the Western Command. They read a message from the German commander in Chief West. He reports that the main Allied force is clearly assembled opposite the Pas de Calais. He is moving the 15th Army to Calais. He is leaving Normandy defended by second-rate troops. Eisenhower holds the decrypt in his hand. He knows the enemy's mind better than the enemy knows himself. He gives the order. Okay, let's go. June 6th, 1944. The fleets launch. But the story of Bletchley Park does not end with the victory. It ends with a tragedy of silence. As the Allied armies sweep across Europe, the intelligence teams follow. They are T-Force. Their job is to capture the German technology before it is destroyed. They find the Lorenz machines, they find the Enigmas, they capture the operators. But back at Bletchley, the order comes down from the very top, from Churchill himself. Destroy everything. The bombs are dismantled. The Colossus machines, the first electronic computers in human history, are broken down into scrap metal. The blueprints are burned. The thousands of men and women who work there are gathered together. They are told, you never existed. This place never happened. If you speak of what you did here, you will be prosecuted. They go home. They go back to being bank clerks, teachers, and housewives. They watch movies where the war is won by dashing pilots and gritty infantrymen. They say nothing. Bill Tutte goes back to Cambridge. Tommy Flowers goes back to the post office to build telephone lines. Alan Turing continues his work on computing, but in a world that has no idea he saved it. For 30 years, the silence holds. The history books are written without the enigma. The Battle of the Atlantic is described as a victory of radar and courage. The computer revolution is attributed to Americans in the 1950s. It is the greatest secret of the 20th century. But secrets have a way of surfacing. The guns go silent on May 8, 1945. The lights come back on in Europe. The convoys turn on their navigation lamps for the first time in 6 years. The Wolfpacks surrender. The U-boats rise to the surface, hoist the black flags of capitulation, and sail into British ports. But at Bletchley Park, there is no parade, there is no fanfare. General Eisenhower estimated that the work done at Bletchley Park shortened the war in Europe by at least 2 years. Think about that number. 2 years. If the war had continued until 1947, the atomic bomb might have been dropped on Berlin. The V-2 rockets would have leveled London. The Soviet Iron Curtain might have reached the Rhine. 14 million more people would have died in the camps and on the battlefields. 14 million lives saved by a group of people who were not allowed to tell their own families what they did for a living. This is the climax of our story. It is not a moment of glory. It is a moment of erasure. The Codebreakers are given a final order. Ultra is to remain secret. The world must not know that the unbreakable Enigma was broken. Why? Because Britain sold the captured Enigma machines to its former colonies and developing nations after the war. It's secure, they said. The Germans used it. So for decades, British intelligence read the secret communications of half the world because those countries believed the Enigma myth. To protect this secret, the Codebreakers had to destroy their own legacy. Tommy Flowers, the man who built Colossus, took his blueprints and burned them in a furnace. He went back to the post office research station. When he tried to get funding for a new computer project in the 1950s, the bank rejected him. They said, it is impossible to build a machine that works that fast. He couldn't say, oh, I already did it 10 years ago. He remained silent. He died in 1998, only fully recognized in his final years. Bill Tutte, the genius who reverse engineered the Lorenz in his head, became a math professor in Canada. He never mentioned the war. When he was inducted into the Royal Society in 1987, his citation mentioned his work on graph theory. It said nothing about the fact that he had saved the Normandy invasion. But the darkest shadow falls on Alan Turing. Turing was the architect of the victory. He was the mind that defeated the machine. But in the eyes of the British law in 1952, he was a criminal. In 1952, Turing's home was burglarized. He reported it to the police. During the investigation, it was revealed that he was in a relationship with a man. Homosexuality was illegal in Great Britain. The police did not care about his war record. They did not care about the OBE medal in his drawer. They arrested him for gross indecency. He was given a choice: prison or probation conditional on organotherapy, chemical castration. He chose the treatment. He wanted to keep working. He wanted to keep his computer. For a year, the government he saved injected him with synthetic estrogen. It made him sick. It caused him to grow breasts. It altered the mind that had outthought the Third Reich. His security clearance was revoked. He was barred from the secrets he had invented. June 7th, 1954. Alan Turing lies in his bed in Wilmslow. Beside him is a half-eaten apple. The coroner determines the cause of death is cyanide poisoning. He was 41 years old. The man who shortened the war by 2 years, who laid the foundation for the digital age, died alone, branded a criminal by the society he preserved. It took until 2009 for the British Prime Minister to issue an apology. It took until 2013 for the Queen to grant him a royal pardon. For 30 years, the silence held. History books were written describing the Battle of the Atlantic as a game of cat and mouse won by radar and brave captains. The crucial element, the fact that the Allies were playing with a cheat code, was missing. Then, in 1974, the dam broke. Group Captain F.W. Winterbottom published a book called The Ultra Secret. He had been the officer responsible for distributing the ultra intelligence. He was old. He wanted the story told before everyone died. The publication hit the world like a shockwave. Historians had to rewrite the entire narrative of World War II. Suddenly, inexplicable Allied decisions made sense. Why did the convoy turn left? Because they knew. Why did the fleet move to Midway? Because they knew. The veterans of Bletchley Park, now in their 60s and 70s, were stunned. They called each other. Is it true? Can we speak? The stories poured out. The Wrens, now grandmothers, told their husbands that they hadn't just been secretaries filing papers. They had been operating the first computers in history. They had been sinking U-boats. So where does this leave us? Let's return to the image of the Enigma machine. It sits today in a glass case in the Bletchley Park Museum. It is silent. The rotors are still. The lamps are dark. It is a beautiful piece of engineering. It is precise, tactile, and logical. It represents the height of the industrial age, a machine built to scramble truth into noise. But it was defeated. It was not defeated by a bigger machine. It was not defeated by a stronger army. It was defeated by a crossword puzzle contest, by a group of people who did not fit in, by women who stood for 8 hours in hot rooms plugging in red and blue wires, by a gay mathematician who saw the world differently, by a Polish student who looked at a string of letters and saw a shape. The story of the Enigma is the story of the transition from the physical world to the digital world. When Kapitän-Leutnant Heitmann looked through his periscope in 1942, he thought he was fighting a physical war. He thought he was safe because his submarine was invisible under the water. He was wrong. He was already dead. He was dead because a vacuum tube in a brick hut in England had calculated his position. He was the first casualty of the information age. Today, every time you send an encrypted text message, every time you buy something online, every time a computer processes a logic state, you are walking in the shadow of Bletchley Park. The Enigma machine generated 159 quintillion possibilities. It was designed to be perfect. But there's no such thing as a perfect machine because every machine is built by humans. And humans make mistakes. Humans get lazy. Humans get arrogant. And other humans armed with nothing but persistence and logic will always find the crack in the wall. This has been the story of cracking the Enigma code in 2 hours. My name is Jack. Thank you for listening.